The morning sun cast golden rays through the towering glass windows of the Meridian Tower, one of Manhattan's most prestigious business buildings. 24-year-old Lily Martinez clutched her worn leather portfolio tighter as she stepped through the revolving doors, her black pumps clicking against the marble floor. The lobby stretched endlessly before her, all gleaming surfaces and rushing executives in $1,000 suits. She checked her phone one more time. Floor 47, Henderson and Associates. This was it. Her chance to finally land a decent secretary position after months of rejection letters and dead-end interviews. Lily had graduated with honors from business school, but student loans and a sick mother meant she needed steady income more than she needed pride. The Henderson firm wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and offered health insurance. She'd practiced her interview answers in the mirror that morning, perfecting her professional smile and rehearsing why she wanted to work in commercial real estate law. Her navy blazer was borrowed from her roommate, her resume printed on the nicest paper she could afford. The elevator climbed steadily, her reflection multiplying in the polished walls. 45, 46, 47. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a corridor lined with frosted glass offices. Lily stepped out, scanning the directory. Henderson and Associates should be to the right, but the hallway seemed to stretch in both directions. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother asking about the interview, making her smile despite her nerves. Distracted, Lily turned left instead of right, her heels echoing in the quiet hallway. The nameplate on the corner office read, Executive Suite, but she was too focused on psyching herself up to notice. She knocked twice on the heavy oak door and heard a deep voice call out, "Come in." Taking a deep breath, Lily pushed open the door and stepped inside. The office was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, modern art on the walls, and a massive mahogany desk that probably cost more than her car. Behind it sat a man who made her forget every word she'd planned to say. He was tall, even while sitting, with dark hair slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his white shirt crisp despite the early hour. But it was his eyes that caught her, steel blue and sharp enough to cut glass. He looked up from his computer screen with an expression of cool assessment, and Lily felt her carefully rehearsed confidence wobble. "You're late," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made boardrooms go silent. "I expected you an hour ago." Lily blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but my interview isn't until 9:30. I think there might be some confusion." The man stood, revealing his impressive height, and walked around the desk with predatory grace. "Interview?" His laugh was sharp, humorless. "We're past interviews. The contracts were signed weeks ago. My lawyers assured me everything was arranged." "Contracts?" Lily's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Sir, I think you have me confused with someone else. I'm here about the secretary position at Henderson and Associates." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtly masculine. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. "Lily Martinez, 24, business degree from Columbia, originally from Phoenix. Did I miss anything?" Lily's portfolio slipped from her nerveless fingers, papers scattering across the polished floor. "How do you know all that?" "Because, Miss Martinez, you're supposed to be my bride." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Lily felt the blood drain from her face, her knees going weak. "I'm sorry, what?" "Don't play innocent. The arrangement was made months ago. Your father needed investors for his struggling restaurant chain. My grandfather needed me married to secure his will. A simple business transaction that benefits everyone involved." "My father?" Lily's voice cracked. "My father died when I was 16, and I don't know anything about any arrangement." For the first time, Uncertainty flickered across the man's features. He stepped back, studying her with new attention. "That's impossible. I have all the documentation. Lily Martinez, Phoenix native, business student. The details match perfectly." "There has to be another Lily Martinez," she said desperately. "I came here for a job interview, not to marry a complete stranger." The man moved to his desk, pulling out a thick folder. He spread several documents across the surface, his frown deepening as he read. "According to this, we're supposed to meet today to finalize the wedding arrangements. The ceremony is scheduled for next month." Lily crept closer, peering at the papers despite her shock. There, in black and white, was indeed her name, her age, even her college. But the family details were all wrong. This Lily Martinez had a father named Roberto, who owned restaurants across the Southwest. This Lily Martinez had apparently agreed to marry someone named Alexander Kane, CEO of Kane Industries, in exchange for a $5 million business investment. "This is insane," she whispered. "I don't know who this other woman is, but she's not me." Alexander Kane, she now knew his name, looked up from the documents with something that might have been disappointment. "So, you're telling me you're not here to marry me?" "I'm telling you, I'm here to interview for a $20 an hour secretary job, because I need to pay my student loans and my mother's medical bills." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below. Alexander's expression had shifted from commanding to calculating, and Lily didn't like the new gleam in his eyes. "Interesting," he said slowly. "So you're the wrong woman, in the wrong office, for the wrong reasons." "Completely wrong," Lily confirmed, bending to gather her scattered papers. "I should go find the right office and pretend this never happened." "Or," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a tone that made her pause mid-crouch, "we could make this arrangement work for both of us." Lily straightened slowly, clutching her papers. "I'm sorry? You need money. I need a wife. The original Lily Martinez is apparently nowhere to be found, and I can't postpone this wedding indefinitely. My grandfather's will is very specific about the timeline." "You can't be serious." Alexander moved closer again, and this time Lily held her ground, lifting her chin defiantly. "I'm always serious about business, Miss Martinez. Think about it. 1 year of marriage, all expenses paid, and at the end, a settlement large enough to pay your mother's medical bills and clear your debt. All you have to do is play the part." Lily's mind reeled. The rational part of her screamed that this was crazy, that she should run from this office and never look back. But the practical part, the part that had been calculating bills and interest rates for months, whispered seductive numbers. Enough money to save her mother. Enough to start fresh. "This is absolutely insane," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Insane, but profitable." Alexander's smile was sharp, predatory. "I researched the original candidate thoroughly. You're better educated, more articulate, and frankly more attractive than the woman I was expecting. From a business standpoint, you're an upgrade." Heat flooded Lily's cheeks. "I'm not a commodity to be upgraded." "In this arrangement, that's exactly what you are. But you're a well-compensated commodity with full autonomy once the contract expires." Lily stared at him. This arrogant stranger who spoke about marriage like a corporate merger. Everything about this was wrong. But her mother's latest medical bills flashed through her mind. The stack of past due notices on her kitchen table. The phone calls from collection agencies that she'd stopped answering. "If I were to consider this, hypothetically," she said carefully, "what would be expected of me?" Alexander's smile widened. "Public appearances, social functions, playing the devoted wife for my grandfather and the board of directors. In private, we maintain separate lives. Think of it as an extended acting job. And after a year? Divorce, settlement, and you disappear back to whatever life you choose. Lily closed her eyes, her practical side warring with her principles. When she opened them, Alexander was watching her with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was cornered. I need time to think about this. Unfortunately, time is a luxury neither of us has. The board meeting is tomorrow, and I need to present my wife to secure my position as CEO. It's now or never, Miss Martinez. The words felt like a trap closing around her, but Lily found herself nodding slowly. If I agree, I want everything in writing. Every detail, every expectation, every penny of compensation. Naturally, I'll have my lawyers draft a contract this afternoon. And I want to meet your grandfather before I commit to anything. Alexander's eyebrows rose. That's not typically how these arrangements work. Then maybe you should have found your original bride, Lily shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. For a moment, something like admiration flickered in Alexander's eyes. Fair enough. We'll visit him this evening. But I should warn you, he can be intimidating. More intimidating than a man who proposes marriage to a stranger in his office. Alexander actually laughed, a real sound this time instead of that sharp bark. We'll see. As Lily signed the preliminary agreement that afternoon, her hands trembled slightly. Alexander's lawyers had worked with impossible speed, producing a contract that was both comprehensive and slightly terrifying in its specificity. She would receive a monthly allowance, a wardrobe budget, and full medical coverage for herself and her mother. In return, she would attend all required social functions, live in Alexander's penthouse, and maintain the facade of a loving marriage. Second thoughts? Alexander asked, watching her read the final clauses. Third and fourth thoughts, Lily admitted. But my mother needs surgery, and this is the only way I can afford it. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a brief softening around his eyes. What kind of surgery? Heart valve replacement. She's been on the waiting list for a procedure she can actually afford, but her condition is getting worse. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. The contract includes premium medical coverage that will take effect immediately upon signing. Your mother can have the surgery next week if needed. Lily looked up from the papers, startled by the unexpected kindness in his voice. Why would you do that? Because despite what you might think, I'm not completely heartless. This arrangement benefits both of us, but I don't want your mother to suffer while we play house. It was the first genuinely human thing he'd said since she'd walked into his office, and it caught Lily completely off guard. For a moment, she saw past the cold CEO facade to something warmer underneath. Thank you, she said quietly, and meant it. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you meet my grandfather. That evening, Alexander's driver picked Lily up from her modest apartment in Queens. She'd changed into her one good dress, a simple black, number that she hoped would pass muster in whatever world Alexander Kane inhabited. The car that arrived was sleek and silver, with leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Alexander was already inside, having traded his business suit for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that somehow made him look both more approachable and more dangerous. You clean up well, he said as she settled beside him. Gee, thanks for the ringing endorsement. I meant it as a compliment. Your delivery needs work. He studied her profile as the car pulled into traffic. Are you always this sharp-tongued with people who hold your financial future in their hands? Are you always this arrogant with people who are doing you enormous favors? Alexander was quiet for a moment, then laughed. This is going to be interesting. The Kane family estate was in the Hamptons, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from an English countryside. Lily's dress suddenly felt even more inadequate as they walked up the circular drive, past gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Nervous? Alexander asked, noticing her silence. Terrified, Lily admitted. I'm about to lie to your grandfather about being your loving fiancé when I've known you for exactly 8 hours. 7 hours and 43 minutes, Alexander corrected. And you don't have to lie. Just don't volunteer the truth. That's the same thing. It's really not. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing an elderly man in an expensive suit who looked like an older, softer version of Alexander. His eyes were the same steel blue, but they crinkled with warmth when he smiled. Alexander? My boy. The man embraced his grandson with genuine affection before turning to Lily with undisguised curiosity. And this must be the famous Lily I've heard so much about. Grandfather, this is Lily Martinez. Lily, my grandfather. William Kane. William took Lily's hand in both of his, studying her face with the same intensity as his grandson, but with far more kindness. My dear, you're even more beautiful than Alexander described. Welcome to the family. Lily felt heat rise in her cheeks. Thank you, Mr. Kane. It's wonderful to meet you. Please, call me William. We're going to be family soon, after all. The inside of the house was as impressive as the exterior, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. But there was warmth here, too. Family photos lining the mantelpiece, comfortable furniture that looked lived in rather than just decorative. Over dinner, William regaled them with stories of his youth, his late wife, and his pride in Alexander's business acumen. I always worried he was too focused on work, he confided to Lily over dessert. But seeing him with you, I can tell that's changed. Lily glanced at Alexander, who was playing his part perfectly, reaching over to take her hand, smiling at her with convincing warmth. But she could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he monitored his grandfather's reactions. How did you two meet? William asked, leaning forward with interest. Lily's mind went blank. They hadn't discussed a cover story, hadn't prepared for basic questions that any grandfather would ask. She felt panic rising in her throat. It was quite romantic, actually, Alexander said smoothly, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. She literally walked into my life when I least expected it. 1 minute I was buried in spreadsheets, the next minute there she was, completely changing everything. It was technically true, Lily realized, just not in the way William would interpret it. Alexander's storytelling skills were impressive, weaving facts into a narrative that satisfied his grandfather's curiosity without containing a single outright lie. Love at first sight? William asked with a romantic smile. Something like that, Alexander replied, his eyes meeting Lily's with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, the pretense felt uncomfortably real. Alexander was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for, and her traitorous heart responded with a flutter of genuine attraction. This was dangerous territory, forgetting that this was all an act. After dinner, William insisted on showing Lily the family photo albums, pointing out baby pictures of Alexander that made the stern CEO blush. He was such a serious child, William explained. Always reading, always thinking. His parents were so busy with their social climbing that they missed most of his childhood. Grandfather, Alexander warned, but there was affection in his voice. What? She should know what she's getting into. This boy has spent his whole life trying to prove he's worthy of love. Maybe now he'll finally believe it. The comment hung in the air, heavy with meaning that Lily didn't quite understand, but felt in her chest. Alexander's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, and she found herself wanting to comfort him, to smooth away whatever old pain his grandfather had inadvertently touched. I think he's pretty wonderful, she heard herself say, and was surprised to realize she meant it. William beamed. I knew you were perfect for him the moment I saw you. As they drove back to the city, the car was quiet except for the hum of the engine. Lily stared out the window at the passing lights, processing the evening's revelations. Your grandfather is lovely, she said finally. He is. He also has a weak heart, and 6 months to live, which is why this whole charade is necessary. Lily turned to stare at him. 6 months? The will specifies that I must be married to inherit his position as head of the family trust. If I'm not married by my 30th birthday next month, control passes to my cousin Marcus, who will run the company into the ground within a year. And you couldn't just find a real bride? Alexander's laugh was bitter. I've spent 15 years building a reputation as someone who doesn't do relationships. The kind of women in my social circle are either gold diggers or socialites looking for status. Neither type makes for a convincing love story. So you decided to buy a bride instead. I decided to enter a mutually beneficial business arrangement with someone who needed what I could provide. Lily studied his profile in the passing streetlights. What did your parents do to you? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What makes you think they did anything? The way your grandfather talked about them. The way you talk about relationships like they're corporate mergers. That kind of emotional distance doesn't happen in a vacuum. Alexander was quiet for so long that Lily thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. They married for money and status, had a child because it was expected. Spent my childhood in a cold war of passive aggression and strategic manipulation. I learned early that love is just another word for leverage. That's horrible. That's reality. At least our arrangement is honest about what it is. Lily wanted to argue, to tell him that real love existed, that not all relationships were transactions. But looking at this man who spoke about affection like a foreign concept, she realized he might be too damaged to believe her. The car pulled up in front of her building, but neither of them moved to get out. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Alexander said. I'll have my assistant coordinate with you on the details. And Lily? He turned to look at her directly. Thank you. For agreeing to this, for being kind to my grandfather, for not running screaming when you realized what you'd walked into. The night is still young, Lily replied, but her voice was gentle. Alexander almost smiled. Indeed it is. 3 weeks later, Lily stood before a full-length mirror in the bridal suite of Manhattan's most exclusive hotel, barely recognizing herself. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, custom-made by a designer whose name she'd only heard whispered in fashion magazines. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, her makeup applied by artists who normally worked with celebrities. You look like a princess, her mother whispered from the wheelchair beside her. The surgery had been a complete success, and Maria Martinez was already showing dramatic improvement, though she still needed rest. I feel like a fraud, Lily replied, adjusting the diamond necklace that Alexander had insisted she wear. Mama, what am I doing? You're saving our family, Maria said firmly, and maybe, if you're lucky, finding something real in the process. It's not real, Mama. It's a business arrangement. Mija, I've seen the way that man looks at you. That's not business. Lily wanted to argue, but she'd noticed it too. Over the past 3 weeks, as they'd attended parties and dinners together, she'd caught Alexander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't the calculating look he wore in business meetings, but something softer, more confused. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It's time, called the wedding coordinator. The ceremony was small but elegant, held in the hotel's rooftop garden, with Manhattan glittering in the background. Alexander stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful CEO. When Lily appeared at the end of the aisle, his expression shifted to something that looked suspiciously like genuine awe. As she walked toward him, Lily reminded herself that this was performance, that the tender way he was looking at her was for the benefit of their guests. But when she reached the altar, and he took her hands in his, the warmth in his eyes seemed impossible to fake. You're beautiful, he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. So are you, she replied without thinking. then blushed at her own boldness. The ceremony proceeded like a dream. Alexander's voice was steady as he recited vows they'd written together, promises that sounded heartfelt, despite being carefully crafted for maximum emotional impact. When it came time for the kiss, Lily expected something perfunctory, a brief meeting of lips for the sake of tradition. Instead, Alexander cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The guests, the pretense, the contract. There was only the gentle pressure of his lips and the surprising warmth in his touch. When they broke apart, Alexander's eyes held the same confusion she felt. This wasn't supposed to feel real. The reception was a whirlwind of congratulations and champagne toasts. Alexander played the devoted husband perfectly, keeping one hand on Lily's waist, introducing her to business associates and family friends with obvious pride. But as the evening wore on, Lily began to notice the subtle signs of strain around his eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked during a quiet moment between conversations. "Fine," he replied automatically, then caught himself. "Actually, no. I hate these events. Too many people, too much small talk, too much pretending. We're doing quite a bit of pretending ourselves." Alexander looked down at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Are we?" Before Lily could ask what he meant, they were swept back into the crowd of well-wishers. But his words echoed in her mind for the rest of the evening. Their first dance was to a classical piece that Alexander had chosen, something soft and romantic that seemed to suit the fairy tale atmosphere. As he held her close, swaying to the music, Lily found herself relaxing into his embrace. "You're a good dancer," she observed. "Boarding school requirement, along with Latin and lacrosse. Such a hard life." "You have no idea," he replied, but there was humor in his voice rather than bitterness. As the song ended, Alexander spun her gracefully, and for a moment, Lily felt like she was living in one of the romance novels she'd devoured as a teenager. Then reality crashed back as she remembered that tomorrow they would begin the complicated dance of pretending to be married while maintaining emotional distance. The penthouse apartment that was now her home was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art. Alexander gave her a brief tour, showing her to a guest room that was larger than her entire previous apartment. "I assumed you'd want your own space," he explained, hovering in the doorway like he wasn't sure of the protocol for fake marriages. "That's thoughtful. Thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them. The passionate, devoted couple from the wedding had disappeared, leaving two strangers who weren't sure how to navigate their new arrangement. "I have an early meeting tomorrow," Alexander said finally, "but my assistant will help you get settled. If you need anything, just ask." "Alexander," Lily called as he turned to leave. "For what it's worth, I had a nice time tonight. The wedding was beautiful." His smile was soft, genuine. "So did I." "Good night, Mrs. Kane." Hearing her new name sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Good night." Alone in her new room, Lily changed out of her wedding dress and into comfortable pajamas, trying to process the day's events. The marriage was legal now, the contract binding. She was Alexander Kane's wife, at least on paper. But as she lay in the enormous bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her during their first dance, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe there was something real growing between them, something that had nothing to do with contracts or convenience. Or maybe she was just a romantic fool who was reading too much into good acting. Either way, she was committed now. For better or worse, she was Mrs. Alexander Kane. Living with Alexander Kane was like sharing space with a beautiful, brilliant storm. He left for work before dawn and returned after dark, moving through the penthouse with focused intensity that made Lily feel like an observer in his life rather than a participant. Their interactions were polite but distant, like cordial roommates who happened to share a last name. The loneliness was unexpected. Lily had anticipated many challenges in their arrangement, but not the hollow feeling of being surrounded by luxury while feeling emotionally invisible. Alexander provided everything the contract specified: a generous allowance, a credit card with no limit, access to personal shoppers and stylists. But he seemed determined to maintain the emotional distance they'd agreed upon, even when they were alone. Their first public appearance as a married couple was a charity gala 2 weeks after the wedding. Lily spent hours getting ready, wanting to make a good impression on Alexander's business associates. When she emerged from her room in a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves, Alexander stopped mid-conversation with his phone pressed to his ear. "I'll call you back," he said, ending the call without taking his eyes off her. "Is something wrong?" Lily asked, suddenly self-conscious. "No, you look stunning." The compliment seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. At the gala, they fell back into their practiced routine of playing the devoted couple. Alexander kept his hand on her lower back as they mingled, introduced her with obvious pride, and laughed at her jokes like they were the wittiest things he'd ever heard. To outside observers, they looked like newlyweds still giddy with love. But Lily was beginning to recognize the subtle signs that Alexander was performing rather than feeling. His smile never quite reached his eyes. His laughter came a beat too late. And his touch, while warm, felt carefully calculated for maximum visual impact. "You're very good at this," she murmured during a quiet moment. "At what?" "Making people believe we're in love." Alexander's expression shuddered. "It's just business." The words stung more than they should have. Lily reminded herself that this was exactly what she'd signed up for. But lately, she'd found herself hoping for something more genuine between them. The evening took an unexpected turn when they encountered Marcus Kane, Alexander's cousin and primary rival for control of the family empire. Marcus was handsome in a softer way than Alexander, with golden hair and an easy smile that charmed everyone around him. Well, if it isn't the happy couple," Marcus said, approaching with a martini in hand and mischief in his eyes. "Congratulations on your whirlwind romance, cousin. How convenient that you found true love just in time to meet grandfather's deadline." "Marcus," Alexander's voice carried a warning. "What?" "I'm just marveling at the timing. 3 months ago, you were telling everyone that marriage was for fools and romantics. Now here you are, completely smitten." Marcus turned to Lily with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be quite special to have changed his mind so dramatically." Lily felt the trap in the comment, the implication that their marriage was suspicious. "Sometimes the right person comes along when you least expect it," she replied carefully. "Indeed. And sometimes people marry for reasons that have nothing to do with love." Marcus's smile turned sharp. "But I'm sure that's not the case here. After all, what could a struggling graduate student possibly offer a billionaire besides pure, authentic affection?" The barb hit its mark. Heat flooded Lily's cheeks as she realized how transparent their arrangement might appear to someone looking for flaws. Alexander stepped closer, his body language turning protective. "Careful, Marcus. You're talking about my wife." "Of course. My apologies, Lily. I'm sure your love is completely genuine." After Marcus walked away, Alexander was quiet for the rest of the evening. During the car ride home, the silence stretched uncomfortably between them. "He knows," Lily said finally. "He suspects. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it felt like he could see right through us." Alexander stared out the window at the passing city lights. "Marcus has always been good at finding weaknesses. It's what makes him dangerous. And I'm your weakness now." "You're—" Alexander started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "The arrangement puts you in a vulnerable position. I'm sorry about that." That night, Lily lay awake, thinking about Marcus's words and Alexander's reaction. There had been something almost protective in the way Alexander had stepped closer, something that felt genuine rather than performed. But she was learning that with Alexander, it was difficult to distinguish between authentic emotion and sophisticated acting. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Alexander appeared at breakfast, looking uncharacteristically ruffled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. "Rough night?" Lily asked, looking up from her coffee. "My grandfather had another episode. He's in the hospital." The news hit Lily like a physical blow. Despite the short time she'd known William Kane, she'd grown genuinely fond of the old man. "Is he okay?" "Stable, for now. But the doctors—" Alexander's voice trailed off, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked vulnerable, scared even. Without thinking, Lily reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "We should go see him." Alexander looked down at their joined hands, something shifting in his expression. "You don't have to. This wasn't part of our agreement. Some things are more important than agreements." At the hospital, William looked frail against the white sheets, but his eyes lit up when he saw them enter together. "My favorite couple," he said weakly. "I was hoping you'd come." They spent the afternoon by his bedside, Lily reading aloud from his favorite book, while Alexander handled business calls in the hallway. When visiting hours ended, William asked to speak with Lily privately. "He loves you, you know," the old man said once Alexander had stepped out. Lily's heart clenched. "Mr. Kane, William, and don't try to deny it. I've watched that boy wall himself off from emotion his entire life. But with you, the walls come down. He may not know it yet, but he loves you." Tears stung Lily's eyes. "It's complicated. Love always is. But some things are worth fighting for." That evening, as they sat in Alexander's study reviewing medical reports and treatment options, Lily found herself studying his profile in the lamplight. His jaw was tight with worry, his shoulders tense with the weight of responsibility. "He's going to be okay," she said softly. "Is he? The doctors aren't optimistic about his long-term prognosis. Then we make sure the time he has left is good. Happy." Alexander looked up from the papers, meeting her eyes directly. "Why do you care so much? You barely know him." "Because he's important to you. And because—" Lily hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Because he's a good man who deserves to be surrounded by people who love him." Something cracked in Alexander's carefully maintained composure. For a moment, his grief was visible, raw, and unguarded. "I don't know how to do this without him. He's been the only constant in my life since I was 10 years old. You won't have to do it without him, and when the time comes, you won't be alone." Alexander stood abruptly, moving to the window with his back to her. "This isn't what you signed up for. Comforting me through family crises, playing the supportive wife for real instead of just for show." Lily joined him at the window, close enough to feel the tension radiating from his body. "Maybe not. But maybe some of the best things in life aren't what we sign up for." He turned to face her, and in the dim light, she could see the war between his desire for connection and his fear of vulnerability. "Lily, I know, this wasn't supposed to be real, but it's starting to feel real." The admission hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Lily reached up to touch his cheek, and Alexander leaned into the contact like a man starved for gentleness. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she whispered. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, might finally bridge the careful distance they'd maintained. Instead, he stepped back, the shutters coming down over his expression once again. "It's late. You should get some rest." Lily nodded, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. But as she headed toward the door, She heard him speak softly behind her. "Thank you. For today. For being there. It meant more than you know." She paused in the doorway, her heart aching with unspoken possibilities. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, wife." The endearment, spoken with unexpected tenderness, followed her all the way to her room. The morning brought crisis in the form of a gossip column that had somehow gotten hold of Marcus's suspicions about their marriage. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's convenient bride, love or leverage," complete with photos from the charity gala and speculation about Lily's modest background. Alexander sat at the breakfast table, his jaw clenched as he read the article on his tablet. This is what I was afraid would happen. Lily peered over his shoulder, her stomach sinking as she read the inflammatory prose. The columnist had done their homework, digging up details about her student loans, her mother's medical bills, even her failed job interviews before meeting Alexander. "They make it sound like I'm some kind of gold digger who trapped you into marriage," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The damage control team is already working on it," Alexander replied, but his tone was grim. "Unfortunately, once these stories gain traction, they're difficult to contain." Lily's phone buzzed with notifications, text messages from friends, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, probably reporters trying to get her side of the story. Her private life had just become public property. "Maybe I should just leave," she said quietly. "Disappear for a while until this blows over." "Absolutely not." Alexander's response was immediate and forceful. "Running away will only confirm their suspicions. We face this together, or not at all." There was something fierce in his voice, protective in a way that made Lily's heart skip. This wasn't just about preserving their business arrangement anymore. He was defending her, personally. Their phones rang simultaneously, Alexander's assistant and Lily's mother, both with urgent concerns about the news coverage. The day became a blur of damage control meetings, carefully worded statements, and strategic appearances designed to project unity and authenticity. By evening, they were both exhausted from maintaining their public facade while privately grappling with the invasion of their privacy. Alexander loosened his tie as they entered the penthouse, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that had become familiar to Lily over their weeks together. "I'm sorry," he said unexpectedly. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated that Marcus would try something like this. You couldn't have known he'd go to the press. I should have protected you better." Lily studied his profile, noting the genuine remorse in his expression. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you defend me, when you talk about protecting me, is that part of the act, or—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish the question without revealing too much of her own growing feelings. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. "I don't know anymore. The lines are getting blurred." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her since their wedding day. Lily felt something shift between them, a door opening that had been carefully locked since they'd signed their contract. "For me, too," she admitted softly. Alexander turned to face her fully, and in his eyes, she saw the same confusion and longing that had been growing in her own heart. This wasn't supposed to happen. No, it wasn't. The contract specifically states that this arrangement is temporary. No emotional attachments. I remember. But somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling like a business partner and started feeling like— He paused, searching for words. Like what? Like someone I don't want to lose. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and dangerous. Lily took a step closer, drawn by the uncertainty in his voice and the hope she hardly dared acknowledge. "Alexander, what are you saying?" Before he could answer, his phone rang with the harsh sound of an emergency call. Alexander glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. It's the hospital. The ride to the hospital was silent except for the sound of city traffic and Lily's racing heartbeat. Alexander gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. When they arrived, the doctor's grave expression told them everything they needed to know before he spoke. William Kane had suffered a massive heart attack. He was stable but weak, and the prognosis wasn't good. They were allowed to see him briefly, finding him connected to machines that beeped steadily in the quiet room. Alexander. William's voice was barely a whisper. Lily, I'm glad you're both here. Don't talk, grandfather. Save your strength. No, I need to say this. William's eyes moved between them with effort. I know this marriage started as an arrangement. I've known from the beginning. Lily's breath caught. Alexander went rigid beside her. But what I've watched develop between you, that's real. Don't let fear or pride destroy something beautiful. Grandfather, you need to rest. Promise me, Alexander. Promise me you'll fight for love when you find it. Your parents never learned that lesson. Don't make their mistake. Alexander's voice was thick with emotion. I promise. William's eyes drifted closed, and the machines continued their steady rhythm. The nurses asked them to leave so he could rest, and they found themselves in the hospital corridor, processing what had just happened. He knew, Lily said finally. He always knows everything. It's infuriating. But he still seemed happy. About us, I mean. Alexander leaned against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. He sees things that aren't there sometimes. Hope where there should be realism. Or maybe he sees things that we're too scared to acknowledge. Alexander looked at her sharply. Lily, what are we doing here? This whole situation has gotten completely out of hand. Has it? Or has it just become more honest? Honest. We're lying to everyone, including ourselves, if we think this can work long term. Why can't it work? The question seemed to catch Alexander off guard. Because it's not real. It's built on a contract, not genuine feeling. Contracts can evolve. People can change. Not people like me. What does that mean? Alexander pushed off from the wall, pacing in the small space. It means I'm not equipped for real relationships, Lily. I don't know how to love someone without wanting to control them, without turning everything into a transaction. That's not true, isn't it? Look at how we started. I literally tried to buy you. But that's not how it continued. The way you took care of my mother, the way you defended me to Marcus, the way you're worrying about your grandfather, that's not control or transaction. That's caring. Alexander stopped pacing, his eyes searching her face. You really believe that? I believe you're capable of more than you think you are. I believe your grandfather sees something in you that you're afraid to see in yourself. And what about you? What do you see? Lily stepped closer, her heart pounding with the risk she was about to take. I see a man who's spent so long protecting himself that he's forgotten what it feels like to be vulnerable. But I also see someone worth fighting for. Lily, I'm falling in love with you, Alexander. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the man who stays up all night when his grandfather is sick, who makes sure my mother gets the best medical care, who holds my hand when he thinks I'm scared. Alexander stared at her, his expression cycling through surprise, fear, and something that looked like desperate hope. This is insane. Maybe, but maybe insane is exactly what we both need. For a moment, she thought he might pull her into his arms, might finally acknowledge what had been building between them for weeks. Instead, he stepped back, the familiar wall sliding back into place. We should go home. It's been a long day. Lily nodded, recognizing the retreat for what it was. But she'd said what needed to be said, put her feelings on the table despite the risk. Now it was up to Alexander to decide what he wanted to do with them. As they drove through the quiet city streets, Lily caught Alexander glancing at her in the peripheral vision, his expression thoughtful. Something had shifted tonight, even if he wasn't ready to acknowledge it yet. Back at the penthouse, they went through their usual nighttime routine, but the air between them was charged with unspoken possibilities. At her bedroom door, Lily paused. "Alexander?" "Yes?" "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that I don't regret any of this. Meeting you, marrying you, falling for you, even if it doesn't work out the way I hope." Alexander's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the longing he'd been trying so hard to hide. "Good night, Lily." "Good night." But as she lay in bed that night, Lily could hear Alexander moving around his room, restless and wakeful. She wondered if he was fighting the same battle she was, between the safety of their original arrangement and the terrifying possibility of something real. The next few days passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Alexander threw himself into work with renewed intensity, leaving early and returning late, while Lily spent her time visiting William in the hospital and trying to ignore the continued media speculation about their marriage. They moved around each other like polite strangers, the intimacy of her confession hanging between them like an unacknowledged elephant. On Thursday evening, Lily was curled up in the living room, reading when Alexander returned home, looking more disheveled than usual. His tie was crooked, his hair mussed, and there was something almost frantic in his eyes. "Long day?" she asked gently. "Marcus called an emergency board meeting. He's pushing for a vote of no confidence, claiming that my personal life is affecting my judgment." Lily set down her book, alarmed. Can he do that? He's building a case. The gossip articles, questions about our marriage, concerns about my focus since grandfather's been ill. Alexander collapsed into the chair across from her, suddenly looking exhausted. He's not entirely wrong. My judgment has been compromised lately. Because of me. Because of what you make me feel. The admission was quiet, but earth-shattering. Lily held very still, afraid that any sudden movement might cause him to retreat again. "Alexander, I can't stop thinking about what you said at the hospital, about falling in love, about fighting for what matters." He looked up at her with eyes that held none of his usual guarded control. "It's terrifying." "Why?" "Because I've never felt this way about anyone. Because I don't know how to separate what I want from what's good for business. And for the first time in my life, I don't care about the business implications." Lily rose from the couch and moved to kneel beside his chair, close enough to see the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. My entire life has been about control, about making logical decisions based on measurable outcomes. But with you, nothing is logical. Nothing makes sense except the fact that I can't imagine my life without you in it." "Then don't try to imagine it." Alexander reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of hair from her face with fingers that trembled slightly. "I've never said these words to anyone before." "What words?" "I love you." The confession came out rough, uncertain, like he was testing how the words felt in his mouth. "I love you. And it's the most irrational, impractical, completely illogical thing I've ever done." Lily felt tears spring to her eyes. "Alexander, I love the way you argue with me when you think I'm being arrogant. I love how you read to my grandfather like he's your own family. I love that you see through all my defenses to whatever's left of my heart underneath." "There's a lot left of your heart," Lily whispered, covering his hand with hers. "More than you know. I don't know how to do this, Lily. I don't know how to be a husband who loves his wife instead of just a man fulfilling a contract. We figure it out together. That's what marriage is supposed to be, right? Two people learning how to love each other better every day." Alexander pulled her up from the floor and into his lap, holding her close like he was afraid she might disappear. "I'm probably going to be terrible at this. Lucky for you, I'm a very patient teacher." He laughed, the sound lighter than she'd ever heard from him. "And if I mess this up, if I hurt you because I don't know how to be what you need, then we figure that out too, together." Alexander cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I love you, Lily Kane, not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because you walked into my life and changed everything. I love you too. The real you, not the perfect CEO image you show the world." When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like their carefully performed public displays of affection. This was raw, desperate, and completely genuine. It was the kiss of a man who had finally stopped fighting his heart and surrendered to what he'd been trying to deny. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now? Now we stop pretending and start being real. What about the board meeting, Marcus? We face it together, as partners, not just contract signers." Alexander was quiet for a moment, then smiled with more genuine warmth than she'd ever seen from him. "You know, when you first walked into my office, I thought you were going to complicate my life. I did complicate your life. Best thing that ever happened to me." That night, for the first time since their wedding, they fell asleep in the same bed. Not because the contract required it, but because neither of them wanted to be anywhere else. Alexander held Lily close, his hand stroking her hair as she drifted off against his chest. "Lily," he murmured in the darkness. "Hmm? Thank you for walking into the wrong office. Thank you for being worth finding." The next morning brought news that William's condition had improved enough for him to return home. When they arrived at the estate to pick him up, he took one look at them and broke into a knowing smile. Well, something's changed." "What makes you say that?" Alexander asked, though he couldn't quite hide his grin. "You're holding hands like you mean it, instead of like you're posing for a photograph. And Lily's practically glowing." "We've come to some understanding," Lily said diplomatically. "About time. I was beginning to worry you'd both be too stubborn to admit what was obvious to everyone else." As they helped William settle back into his favorite chair at home, he pulled Alexander aside. "You kept your promise." "What promise?" "To fight for love when you found it. Your grandmother would be proud." Alexander glanced over at Lily, who was fussing over William's medications with the care of a daughter. "I almost let fear win. But you didn't. That's what matters." The board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Over the weekend, Alexander and Lily prepared their strategy, not as business partners, but as a team united by love and shared purpose. Marcus could question their marriage all he wanted, but he couldn't argue with results, and under Alexander's leadership, Kane Industries had posted record profits. "Whatever happens in that meeting," Alexander said as they dressed for the confrontation, "I want you to know that I don't regret any of this. Even if we lose everything, having you in my life has been worth it." "We're not going to lose everything," Lily replied confidently, straightening his tie. "We're going to win because we have something Marcus doesn't understand." "What's that?" "We have each other, really and truly, not just on paper." The boardroom was tense when they arrived, Marcus sitting at the head of the table like he'd already won. But as Alexander presented his quarterly reports and future projections, speaking with the passion of a man who finally had something worth fighting for, the tide began to turn. When Marcus raised questions about Alexander's personal life affecting his judgment, Lily surprised everyone by standing up to address the board directly. "I know there have been questions about our marriage, about whether it's real or just convenient timing. I'm here to tell you that love isn't always convenient, and real relationships don't always follow expected timelines. What Alexander and I have is genuine, built on respect, partnership, and shared values. If that makes him a better leader, then I'm proud to be part of it. The vote of confidence passed by a wide margin. Marcus's coup attempt had failed, and Alexander's position as CEO was secure. But more importantly, they had faced their first real test as a couple and emerged stronger. That evening, they celebrated quietly at home with William, who raised his glass of wine in a toast. To love conquering all, even corporate politics. To family, Alexander replied, his arm around Lily's waist. To new beginnings, Lily added, smiling up at her husband. As the evening wound down and William retired to his room, Alexander and Lily stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights twinkled like stars, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility. Any regrets? Alexander asked, pulling her closer. Only that it took us so long to get here. We got here when we were ready, when we were both brave enough to admit what we really wanted. And what do we really want? Alexander turned her in his arms, looking down at her with eyes full of love and promise. Everything. A real marriage, a real partnership, a real life together. That sounds perfect to me. He kissed her under the star-lit sky. Lily marveled at how a simple case of wrong directions had led her to exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach. 6 months later, Lily stood in the same office where their story had begun, but everything had changed. The space had been redecorated to reflect both their tastes, with family photos sharing shelf space with business awards. Alexander sat behind his desk, but instead of the cold, intimidating CEO she'd first encountered, he looked up at her with the warm smile of a man who'd learned to balance love and ambition. "Mrs. Kane," he said formally, then broke character with a grin. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "Mr. Kane," she replied, playing along with their game, "I have some important news to share." "Oh? Business or personal?" "Definitely personal." Alexander rose from his chair and moved around the desk, pulling her into his arms with the casual intimacy of a man who no longer questioned his right to touch his wife. "Good news? Or life-changing news?" "Life-changing," Lily confirmed, her heart racing with excitement and nervousness. "I'm intrigued. Tell me more." Instead of answering immediately, Lily reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. Alexander raised an eyebrow as he accepted it, his expression curious. "It's not my birthday," he pointed out. "No, but it might be the best day of our lives anyway." Alexander unwrapped the box carefully, his frown deepening as he opened it to reveal what looked like a small plastic device. "Lily, what is this?" "Look closer at the little window." Alexander held the pregnancy test up to the light, and Lily watched as understanding dawned across his features. The test showed 2 clear pink lines, unmistakable in their meaning. "Are you?" he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pregnant. About 8 weeks along, according to the doctor." The box slipped from Alexander's fingers as he stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, joy, and something that looked like awe. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," Lily confirmed, tears starting to fall as relief washed over her. She'd been nervous about his reaction, unsure how he'd feel about this unplanned development in their carefully structured life. Alexander's response eliminated all her doubts. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the office, as laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep in his chest. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I can't believe it," he murmured, his hand settling gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Lily asked, needing to hear the words. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, ecstatic, overwhelmed, grateful, all at the same time. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I love you so much, and I already love this baby, even though it wasn't planned. Especially because it wasn't planned, the best things in my life have been the ones I never saw coming. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans, discussing doctor's appointments and nursery designs, and all the ways their lives were about to change. Alexander called his assistant to clear his schedule for the rest of the day, something the old Alexander never would have done. I want to tell my grandfather in person, he said, as they prepared to leave the office. He's going to be thrilled. He's going to say he knew it was coming. He probably did. He has an uncanny ability to see the future when it comes to family. At the estate, William's reaction was everything they'd hoped for, and more. The old man actually teared up when they shared the news, pulling them both into fierce hugs. A great-grandchild, he said wonderfully. Your grandmother would have been over the moon. We want you to be very involved, Lily said, meaning every word. This baby is going to need their great-grandfather. Just try to keep me away. I have so many stories to tell, so much wisdom to pass down. Selective wisdom, Alexander warned with a grin. Some family stories are classified. That evening, as they lay in bed with Lily curled against Alexander's side, they talked quietly about the future. Alexander's hand rested protectively over her stomach, and Lily marveled at how natural the gesture seemed. Are you nervous? She asked. Terrified, Alexander admitted. I don't exactly have a great role model for fatherhood. You have William, and you have yourself, the man you've become, not the child you used to be. What if I mess it up? What if I'm too controlling, too focused on success to be a good father? Lily turned in his arms so she could see his face in the dim light. Do you remember what you said to me the night I told you I loved you? About not knowing how to be a real husband? I remember. And how did that turn out? Alexander's smile was soft, grateful. Better than I ever imagined possible. This will be the same. We'll figure it out together, just like we figured out everything else. Together, Alexander repeated, like he was still amazed by the concept. Together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Alexander proving to be an unexpectedly attentive, expectant father. He read every parenting book he could find, interviewed pediatricians with the thoroughness of a CEO hiring a new executive, and treated Lily like she was made of spun glass. You don't have to hover, she told him one morning when she found him watching her eat breakfast with intense concentration. I'm not hovering. I'm observing, making sure you're getting proper nutrition. Alexander, I'm pregnant, not fragile. You're carrying my child. That makes you the most precious thing in my world. It was impossible to argue with, that kind of devotion, so Lily just smiled and let him fuss. The truth was, she loved seeing this tender side of him, the way he talked to her stomach when he thought she was asleep, the way he'd already started planning their child's education and future. Marcus, meanwhile, had been notably absent from their lives since his failed coup attempt. Alexander had heard through business channels that his cousin was focusing on other ventures, apparently finally accepting that Kane Industries was beyond his reach. The nursery came together beautifully, decorated in soft yellows and greens, since they'd decided to wait until birth to learn the baby's gender. Alexander insisted on assembling the crib himself, despite having no practical experience with furniture construction. I think this piece goes here, he said, studying the instruction manual with the same intensity he brought to merger documents. Or we could call someone who knows what they're doing, Lily suggested from her perch on the rocking chair. Absolutely not. I'm perfectly capable of assembling a piece of furniture. 3 hours later, with the crib finally complete and only 2 extra screws remaining, Alexander stepped back to admire his handiwork. See? Perfectly simple. My hero, Lily said with genuine affection, and meant it. At 37 weeks, Lily woke up in the middle of the night with sharp pains in her lower back. She tried to ignore them, assuming it was just another pregnancy discomfort. But when they became regular and intense, she shook Alexander awake. "I think it's time," she said quietly. Alexander went from sound asleep to wide awake instantly. "Time? As in baby time?" "As in baby time." What followed was a flurry of activity as they gathered the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago and called the doctor. Alexander was surprisingly calm in crisis mode, helping Lily through contractions while coordinating with medical staff with the efficiency of a man accustomed to managing complex situations. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Alexander holding Lily's hand through every contraction and whispering encouragement in her ear. When their daughter finally arrived, screaming and perfect, both parents were reduced to tears. "She's beautiful," Alexander whispered, his voice thick with emotion as the doctor placed the baby on Lily's chest. "She looks like you," Lily said, noting the baby's dark hair and serious expression. "She has your mouth, and hopefully your temperament." They named her Grace Elena Kane, after Alexander's grandmother and Lily's middle name. When William met his great-granddaughter for the first time, he declared her the most beautiful baby ever born, which Alexander solemnly agreed was absolutely accurate. "She's going to be spoiled rotten," Lily observed, watching her husband gaze at their daughter with complete besotment. "Absolutely," Alexander confirmed without shame. "She's a Kane. It's her birthright." As they settled into life as a family of three, Lily often reflected on the twists of fate that had brought them together. A wrong turn, a case of mistaken identity, a fake marriage that had become the most real thing in her life. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd found the right office that day?" she asked Alexander one evening as they watched Grace sleep in her bassinet. "Never," Alexander replied firmly, "because somehow I know you would have found your way to me eventually. Some things are just meant to be." "You sound like your grandfather." "I'm taking that as a compliment." "You should." As Grace grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the Kane family settled into a rhythm of love, laughter, and the occasional chaos that comes with raising a strong-willed child who had definitely inherited both parents' stubborn streaks. Alexander proved to be an adoring father who wasn't above getting down on the floor to play blocks or reading the same bedtime story 15 times in a row if Grace requested it. Lily watched him with their daughter and marveled at the transformation from the cold CEO she'd first met to this warm, devoted family man. "You're staring again," Alexander observed one Saturday morning as they watched Grace toddle around the garden, chasing butterflies. "I'm admiring," Lily corrected. "There's a difference." "Admiring what?" "The man you've become, the father you are, the husband you turned out to be." Alexander pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. We did it together." "Together," he agreed, and in that simple word was the story of everything they'd built. A love that had started as pretense and become the foundation of a life neither of them could have imagined. As Grace squealed with delight over a particularly beautiful butterfly, her parents watched with the contentment of two people who had found exactly what they didn't know they were looking for. Sometimes the wrong door led to exactly the right place. Years passed, like pages in a favorite book, each chapter bringing new joys and challenges that Alexander and Lily faced as the true partners they'd become. Grace grew into a precocious 4-year-old, with her father's determination and her mother's compassion, ruling their household with the benevolent tyranny that only beloved children can manage. "Daddy, why do you wear those boring suits?" Grace asked one morning, climbing onto Alexander's lap as he reviewed reports over breakfast. Because grown-ups wear suits to work, sweetheart. But they're so gray and sad. You should wear colors like Mommy does. Lily hid her smile behind her coffee cup, watching her husband's expression soften, as it always did when their daughter offered her opinions on his life choices. "What colors do you think I should wear?" Alexander asked seriously, as if consulting with his most important advisor. "Purple, and maybe some sparkles." "Sparkles might be challenging in board meetings. Then the other people are boring too." "She has a point," Lily interjected. "You could branch out a little. Maybe a blue shirt instead of white once in a while." Alexander looked between his wife and daughter, both watching him with expectant expressions. "I suppose I could consider some strategic wardrobe updates." "Yay!" Grace clapped her hands. "I'll help you pick." It was moments like these that reminded Alexander how much his life had changed since Lily had walked into his office with her nervous smile and determined spirit. The man who had once valued control above all else now found his greatest joy in the beautiful chaos of family life. The business continued to thrive under Alexander's leadership, but he'd learned to delegate more, to trust his team, and most importantly, to leave work at the office. Family dinners were sacred, bedtime stories were non-negotiable, and Saturday mornings belonged entirely to whatever adventure Grace had planned for them. William, now in his 80s, but still sharp as ever, remained an integral part of their family. Grace adored her great-grandfather, and he spoiled her with the enthusiasm of a man who had waited his entire life to have a little girl to dote on. "She's going to run the company someday," he declared one afternoon as they watched Grace build an elaborate castle out of blocks. "She's 4, grandfather," Alexander pointed out. "Never too early to start planning. Look at that focus, that attention to detail. She's a natural leader." "Or she just likes building things," Lily suggested diplomatically. "Leadership qualities," William insisted. "Mark my words." The conversation was interrupted by Grace's announcement that her castle needed a princess, and would someone please help her find one in her toy box. Alexander immediately abandoned his coffee to assist with this crucial architectural decision, because in his daughter's eyes, he was the most important person in the world, and he never took that responsibility lightly. One evening, as they were putting Grace to bed, she looked up at her parents with the serious expression she wore when contemplating life's big questions. "Mommy, Daddy, how did you fall in love?" Lily and Alexander exchanged glances over their daughter's head. They'd discussed this moment, knowing that eventually, Grace would be curious about their story. "Well," Lily began carefully, "Mommy got lost one day and ended up in Daddy's office by mistake." "You got lost?" Grace's eyes widened with interest. "I was looking for a job, and I went to the wrong place. But sometimes, wrong turns lead us exactly where we need to be." "Did Daddy give you a job?" "He gave me something much better," Alexander said, smoothing Grace's hair. "He gave me a family." "And Mommy gave me the best surprise of my whole life," Lily added. "What surprise?" "You," both parents said simultaneously, making Grace giggle. "Tell me the rest of the story." So they did, editing appropriately for a 4-year-old audience, turning their complicated beginning into a fairy tale about finding love in unexpected places. Grace listened with rapt attention, asking questions about the wedding. Was Mommy a beautiful princess? And the early days of their marriage. Did you live happily ever after right away? "We're still working on the happily ever after part," Alexander explained. "That's the thing about love, sweetheart. It keeps getting better the longer you practice it." "Like piano lessons?" "Exactly like piano lessons." After Grace was finally asleep, Lily and Alexander retreated to their bedroom, a space that had evolved from the formal guest room where Lily had first slept, to a warm sanctuary filled with photos of their life together. "Do you think we told that story right?" Lily asked, settling into Alexander's arms. "I think we told our story, the version that matters now. Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life." "What? You mean the part where we're blissfully happy with our perfect daughter and our thriving business and our family who loves us unconditionally? When you put it like that, it does sound almost too good to be true." Alexander pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her forehead. "It's real, Lily. We built this together, and it's ours. I love you," she whispered, the words as true now as they had been that first night she'd found the courage to say them. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. "Mommy? Daddy?" "I had a bad dream." Without hesitation, they made room in their bed for their daughter, who snuggled between them with the absolute trust that only children possess. As Grace drifted back to sleep, her small hand clasped in each of theirs, Lily smiled into the darkness. "This is my favorite part of the story," she whispered to Alexander. "What part?" "The part where we all live happily ever after." "Every day," Alexander agreed softly. "Every single day." The next morning brought news that would test their happiness in a way they never expected. Marcus Kane was back in New York, and according to the business papers, he was planning something big. The headlines were vague but ominous. "Kane cousin returns with mysterious backing, and family feud reignites at Kane Industries." Alexander read the articles over breakfast, while Grace chattered about her plans for the day, and Lily tried to gauge his reaction. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "How serious is this?" she asked once Grace had gone to play in the garden. "Potentially very serious. Marcus has been quiet for too long. If he's backed by outside investors, he could make another play for control. But the board supports you. Your leadership has been incredibly successful." "Success doesn't always matter when there's enough money involved. And Marcus is charming when he wants to be. He could convince some shareholders that change would be profitable." Lily moved behind Alexander's chair, her hand settling on his shoulders to massage away some of the tension. "What do? We prepare. And we remember that whatever happens, we face it together." The first sign of trouble came 3 days later, when Alexander's assistant informed him that several key shareholders had requested private meetings. These were investors who had been loyal to the Kane family for decades, and their sudden desire for one-on-one conversations was concerning. "They're being courted," Alexander explained to Lily that evening. "Marcus is making his pitch, probably promising higher dividends and faster growth." "Can he deliver on those promises?" "In the short term, maybe. But it would require cutting corners, reducing employee benefits, eliminating our environmental initiatives. Everything that makes Kane Industries more than just another corporation." That night, as they lay in bed, Lily could feel Alexander's restlessness. He was staring at the ceiling, his mind clearly racing through scenarios and contingencies. "Talk to me," she said softly. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that I might lose everything my grandfather built. Everything he trusted me to protect." "You won't lose it. We won't let that happen. Marcus has advantages I don't. He's not encumbered by sentiment or loyalty to employees. He can promise investors things I'm not willing to sacrifice." Lily turned to face him in the darkness. "Those things you're not willing to sacrifice? That's exactly why you're the right person to lead this company. That's why the people who matter will stand by you. And if they don't, then we'll build something new, together." Alexander turned to meet her eyes, finding comfort in her unwavering faith. "You make it sound simple. Love is simple. Everything else is just details." The battle for control of Kane Industries played out over the following weeks, like a carefully choreographed drama. Marcus made his move with the precision of a military campaign, targeting shareholders with presentations that promised immediate returns and aggressive expansion. Alexander countered with a different strategy, one that focused on long-term stability and corporate responsibility. He arranged town halls with employees, showcasing the company's community investments and environmental initiatives. Where Marcus promised profit, Alexander offered purpose. The turning point came during a shareholder meeting where both cousins presented their visions for the company's future. Marcus spoke first, his presentation polished and persuasive, full of charts showing projected earnings and market dominance. When Alexander took the stage, he chose a different approach entirely. My grandfather used to tell me that a company's true value isn't measured in quarterly reports, he began, his voice steady and confident. It's measured in the lives it touches, the communities it serves, and the legacy it leaves behind. He talked about employees who had been with the company for decades, about scholarship programs that had sent hundreds of children to college, about environmental initiatives that had won international recognition. But most importantly, he talked about responsibility. Marcus promises you greater profits, and he might deliver them, at least initially. But I promise you something more valuable. A company you can be proud to own. One that builds wealth, not just for shareholders, but for society as a whole. The room was silent when he finished, and for a moment, Alexander wondered if he had misjudged the audience. Then William Kane, still sharp despite his age, stood slowly from his seat. I've watched both of these young men grow up, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. One learned that business is about numbers. The other learned that business is about people. I know which one I'm backing. The vote wasn't even close. Alexander retained control of the company by a margin that surprised even his supporters. Marcus's challenge had failed, decisively and publicly. After the meeting, as shareholders filed out and congratulations were offered, Marcus approached Alexander with something that might have been respect in his eyes. "Well played, cousin," he said quietly. "I underestimated the power of sentiment." "It's not sentiment, Marcus. It's principle." "Perhaps. Either way, you've won this round. I hope you're ready for the responsibility that comes with it." "I've been ready my whole life." Marcus nodded once, then walked away, leaving Alexander to savor his victory with the people who mattered most, his family. That evening, they celebrated quietly at home with William and a few close friends. Grace was allowed to stay up past her bedtime, delighting in the festive atmosphere, even if she didn't quite understand what they were celebrating. "Daddy won," she announced to anyone who would listen. "He's the best daddy in the whole world." "Yes, he is," Lily agreed, watching her husband with pride and love. Later, after the guests had gone home and Grace was finally asleep, Alexander found himself on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. Lily joined him, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "How does it feel to save the company?" she asked. "Like the beginning rather than the end. We've got work to do, plans to implement, a future to build." "We?" Alexander turned in her arms, smiling down at her. "Did you think you could get rid of me that easily? You're stuck with me, Mrs. Kane, for better or worse, remember?" "I remember, and I choose better, every single day." As they stood together under the stars, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first confused encounter in his office to this night of triumph, every step had led them here, to a love that was real, a family that was whole, and a future that was theirs to shape together. "Lily." "Yes?" "Thank you for walking into the wrong office that day. Thank you for being worth finding." In the distance, the city sparkled with endless possibilities. and the Kane family looked toward the future, with hearts full of hope and hands joined in love. Some stories begin with once upon a time, but theirs had started with a simple mistake that turned out to be destiny in disguise. 5 years later, as Grace started kindergarten and Lily discovered she was pregnant with their second child, they would often tell people that the best things in life happen when you least expect them. Love finds you when you're not looking for it. Family grows in ways you never planned, and sometimes the wrong turn leads you exactly where you're meant to be. Their story had started with pretense, but had become the most authentic thing in either of their lives. And as they faced whatever challenges the future might bring, they did so with the unshakable knowledge that together they could handle anything. After all, they'd already proven that love could conquer corporate coups, family drama, and even the most carefully written contracts. What could possibly be more challenging than that? What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.